My name is Tom Voss. I flew a 6-seat survey plane out of a strip in the high desert for 19 years, and on the morning the world ended for the city of San Helio, I was 40,000 feet over the coast with a thermos of bad coffee and a sandwich I would never finish. I want to say this clean while I still can. The doctors tell me my lungs are going to keep getting worse. Cold fog scarring, they call it. Polite words for what those things did to the inside of my chest. So I am telling it now, into a recorder. Because there are kids in this country who think the dome over San Helio was a weather event. And there are men in suits who would prefer they keep thinking that. It was not a weather event. I had been flying back from a contract over the deep survey site at Black Knife Flats. 3 weeks of bouncing geophysicists over a stretch of desert where the government had been doing what they were calling subsurface resonance tests. They told us it was clean. They told us it was nothing the public needed to know about. I flew the men, I flew their instruments, I kept my mouth shut, and I cashed the checks. That is the first thing I have to own. I was not a soldier. I was not a hero. I was a man who took money to fly a plane over a hole in the world while other men hammered on the lid. I was about 90 miles out from San Helio Municipal when the radio went quiet. Not static. Quiet. That is the difference, and pilots know it. Static means something is between you and the tower. Quiet means the tower stopped talking. I tried 2 other frequencies. I tried the regional approach control. I tried a fishing boat band I had no business being on. Nothing came back. The sky in front of me looked wrong. The horizon over the city had a low, dirty gray bank sitting on it, the way smoke sits when a refinery burns, except the bank had edges. It had a shape. Fog does not have edges. I dropped down through it because I had to land somewhere, and I had fuel for maybe another 40 minutes. The bank closed over the top of the airplane like a hand. I lost the sun. I lost the ocean. Inside it the air tasted faintly of pennies and salt, the kind of taste you get when you bite the inside of your cheek. The engine started to lose power, slow at first and then in a way that made my stomach come up. I did not understand it then. I understand it now. Whatever that fog was, it was not water vapor. It was eating the heat. I came out the underside of it low over the runway lights of San Helio Municipal, and I put the plane down hard on a strip that had no one on it, no marshals, no ground crew, no other aircraft on the apron. The terminal windows were lit, but there was nobody in the windows. I sat in the cockpit for a long time. I think I sat there because some part of me knew that opening the door would make whatever had happened to this city become real. When I finally climbed down, the asphalt was wet and shining, and there were tracks across it that did not match any boot I had ever seen. They were V-shaped. 2 long toes, no heel, the whole print as wide as my forearm, and there was something on the asphalt next to them. A clear, thick fluid, almost colorless. When I touched it, the fluid was cold, not cool. The way a glass of ice water is cold, except this was sitting in open air on a runway in summer. That was when I heard the car. A red sedan came over the access road at a speed that should have killed every shock absorber it owned. It slid sideways across the apron and stopped maybe 20 feet from my plane, and 3 people fell out of it. A man in his 60s, gray professorial, carrying what I first thought was a fishing gaff. A woman a few years older than me, handshaking so hard she could not get her own car door closed. And a younger one, maybe 20, with a tear in her jeans and a streak of that same cold, colorless fluid across her shoulder. The old man got to me first. He grabbed the front of my shirt with both hands, and he said the only thing anyone said to anyone in San Helio for the next 2 weeks. "Are you alone? Was the sky open when you came in?" I told him yes and yes, more or less, he sagged. The younger woman started to cry, not loudly, just leaking the way people do when they have been carrying it for days. The older woman put her hand on my arm and said her name was Margaret. She said the old man was Dr. Galbraith. She said the girl was their daughter Lena. She said the rest of San Helio was gone. The dome had come down on the city 6 days before I landed. They knew it was a dome because the army had tried to push through it from the outside on day 2, and the army had not come back. They had tried to push through from the inside on day 3, with everything that drove and everything that flew, and that had not worked either. The fog at the boundary, Galbraith told me, was not gas. It had thickness. Bullets went into it and stopped. Men went into it and stopped, and what came back out a few minutes later was no longer men. The thing he was holding was not a fishing gaff. It was one of their spears. He showed it to me there in the apron light. About 4 feet long. The shaft was a pale waxy gray, almost like soap, and the head was a barbed point of the same material. When I took it from him, it weighed almost nothing. Galbraith tapped the shaft with his knuckle, and I heard the sound, hollow. He said that was the only piece of information he had been able to gather in 6 days that he thought might matter, and he had no idea yet whether it did. I did not know what he meant. I would, soon enough. We left the airport in the red sedan because my plane could not take off through a ceiling that ate engines. Galbraith drove. The streets of San Helio in the dome were the strangest thing I have ever seen, and I have flown over wildfires at night. There were no people. There were cars stopped in intersections with the doors open. There were grocery bags torn in gutters, with cans rolled out of them. There were dogs, here and there, sitting on porches with their ears flat back, refusing to move, refusing to bark. Above us the sky was the color of old milk, and the temperature, in August in Southern California, was somewhere south of 50 degrees. Galbraith took us to a movie theater on a side street called Orson Avenue. He had picked it on day one because it had a windowless lobby, a generator in the basement that ran on diesel, and a side door that opened into a service alley, narrow enough that only one of the things could come through at a time. I learned later that the math of that alley had kept 5 people alive. There were 2 others in the theater when we got there. A man in his late 20s, hair shaved on the sides, in a torn Marine Corps utility shirt. His name was Reyes. He had been on Liberty in San Helio when the dome came down, and his unit had been on the outside of it when they tried to break through. He believed they were all dead. He said so without any tone at all. He had a sidearm with 11 rounds left and a fire axe he had taken off a wall. The other was a woman maybe 10 years older than Reyes, black, short, square-shouldered, in a pharmacist's smock with a name tag that said Holly. She had been working the overnight when the fog came in, and she had locked herself inside the dispensary and waited 2 days before she had risked the street. She had a duffel bag of things that turned out to matter more than any of us guessed at the time. Antihistamines, burn cream, saline, 3 2-liter bottles of distilled water, every variety of cold medicine the store had carried. She was, as she put it, very tired and very awake. We were 6. We did not have a plan. We had the theater, the alley, the spear, 11 rounds, an axe, a duffel of pharmacy, a generator, and an old projection booth that Galbraith had turned into something between a laboratory and a war room. That night the things came for us. I want to describe them properly because the news footage that came out later was edited for what they called public composure, and the public has been seeing a tidied-up version ever since. They were tall, not freakishly tall, but taller than a man, somewhere around 7 feet, and they were narrow at the top and wide at the base. The head was the wrong shape. It was a cone, blunt at the tip, slumping into the shoulders without a neck. Their eyes were small and set low on the face, and their mouths opened sideways instead of up and down. Their skin was the color of a bruise that has been there for days, and it was wet. That was the slime, what people kept calling slime, and it was not slime in any sense you would mean it. It was a thin, constant secretion, and when one of them was cut, the secretion thickened and ran into the wound and sealed it before the wound could even properly bleed. I saw it happen the first time about 2 minutes after they got into the alley. They came in through the alley a little before midnight. We knew, because we had Margaret sitting at a folding chair just inside the lobby door, listening through the crack with a kitchen timer in her lap. She did not call out. She raised her hand. She had decided hours before that she would not use her voice because she did not trust what her voice would do. The first one came around the corner, low, hunched, walking in a way that made my brain refuse to process it. Their knees do not bend the way ours do. The joint is higher. The lower leg is longer. When one of them walks toward you, the upper body stays very still and the bottom half does the work. And the effect, in the headlights of the red sedan we had parked across the alley mouth as a barricade, was of a man being pushed along a track on wheels he could not see. It saw us through the crack of the door and it stopped. It tilted its head. The sideways mouth opened. There was no tongue inside. There were ridges. It made a sound that I have, in 7 years of trying, not been able to describe to anyone, but the closest I can get is the sound of a refrigerator compressor cycling on, run through a throat. Then it came at the door. Reyes shot it in the chest from 6 feet through the gap. The bullet went in. We saw the entry hole. We saw the thing stagger 1 step. Then we watched, in the headlights of the sedan, as the wet skin pulled in around the hole and closed over it like a mouth, and the creature straightened up and kept coming. The slime on its chest where the wound had been was, for a brief moment, a slightly darker color than the rest of it, and then even that faded. Reyes shot it twice more, in the throat, in the head, and the same thing happened both times, and Reyes started swearing in a calm, even voice that scared me more than the things did. Behind me, Lena was making a sound that was not a word, and her father had her by the shoulders and was telling her, very softly, to breathe in through her nose. Galbraith was the one who saved us that first night, and he did it with the spear. He had been holding it the whole time. When the third creature came around the corner, he stepped past Reyes, and he drove the spear into the thing's belly with both hands. It went in deep. The creature reached down and grabbed the shaft and pulled, and that was when we found out why the doctor had been carrying it for 6 days, like a man carrying a question he could not put down. The spear was hollow. The wound it left was not a clean puncture. It was a tube cut through the flesh. The skin tried to close over it, and we watched the skin reach in and meet itself, and we watched it fail, because the hollow shaft was still inside and the seal could not form around an opening that wide and that smooth. The creature took 2 steps back, dropped the shaft, and the slime started to pour out of it in a clear flood. Within 30 seconds the thing was on its knees. Within a minute it was on the floor of the alley, and it was making a sound none of us will ever describe accurately to another person. Galbraith pulled the spear out, looked at the 4 of us, and said, very quietly, "Then we know what to do." What we knew was small. We knew their own weapons killed them and ours did not. We knew there was 1 spear in our hands, and there were, by the most conservative estimate any of us could make from the silhouettes we saw at the alley mouth, somewhere between 40 and 60 of them in our part of the city. We knew the math. The next 4 days we lived in the projection booth and the lobby. Galbraith mapped, on the back of theater posters, every street we could see from the marquee. Holly inventoried everything the pharmacy duffel held, and started making lists of what each chemical could and could not do at what concentration. Reyes drilled the rest of us, every morning, on how to use the spear we had, and the 3 more we had pulled off the bodies of creatures we had killed in the alley over the first 3 nights. Lena, who had been a high school chemistry teacher before the dome came down, started working with her father at the long counter where the popcorn used to be made. Margaret kept the generator running, kept us fed out of the concession stand, and kept her daughter from going to pieces by simply refusing to go to pieces herself. I flew, sort of. There was a roof access ladder in the back of the theater, and on the second morning Galbraith asked me to go up it and tell him what I could see from above. I came down 20 minutes later, and I told him the city was being changed. I told him there was a machine. It was about 6 miles east of us, near the edge of the harbor, and it was the size of a small office building. It was not metal. It was the same waxy gray as the spears. It pulsed. It had no straight lines anywhere on it. From the roof of the Orson Avenue theater it looked like a sea sponge the size of a hospital, sitting on the boulevard, breathing out fog. Galbraith made me draw it. He made Lena draw it. He made Reyes draw it. He laid the 3 drawings on the counter and looked at them and said, "That is the heart of the dome. If we kill that, the fog comes down." Reyes asked the question. "And then what?" Galbraith said, "And then the army comes back in and we get to be people again." We were quiet for a long time after that. On the 5th night the thing happened that I do not like to talk about, but it is part of how we figured the rest out, so I have to. Lena and I were on the lobby door watch. We heard a sound in the alley that was not one of theirs. We opened the door, against every rule Reyes had given us, and we found a man on the pavement. He was older than me. He had been walking, somehow, all the way from the west edge of the city. He had no shoes. His skin, when Lena touched his arm, was the temperature of a refrigerator. He looked at us and he tried to say something, and a thin trickle of clear, cold fluid came out of his mouth, and then he died on the alley pavement, and 20 seconds later he sat up. He did not stand. He did not speak. He sat up, and his head turned toward the alley mouth, and he made a small, querying sound that did not come from a human throat. And Reyes came up behind us with the spear, and he put it through the back of the man's neck, and the man fell forward and was still. Reyes was crying when he did it. I want to put that in. He did the work and he cried. Holly was the one who understood. She had us bring the body inside, and she opened his shirt, and she touched her gloved finger to the fluid on his lips. She put a drop on a strip of pH paper from her duffel. She held the paper up to the light, and she said one word, saline. It was not saline, the exact opposite. The fluid had no salt in it at all. Holly had been a pharmacist for 18 years, and she had spent a lot of those years thinking about isotonic solutions, the chemistry of the inside of a human cell. What happens when the water around a cell has the wrong amount of salt in it? She said the fluid in the mouth was the same fluid that came out of the creatures when we cut them. She said it was not blood. It was an extracellular solution adapted to the chemistry of the inside of the earth, and the inside of the earth, where the rock is hot and the water is rare, has a chemistry very different from a human ocean. She said the creatures were running on a fluid that could not exist in the presence of much salt at all. She said that if it touched salt, The molecules in it that held the wet slime structure together would unbind, and the creature would do, she guessed, something close to what a slug does when you put salt on it, except faster, and across its whole body, and from the inside. Galbraith stared at her. He went to the back of the lobby where he had been holding the spear we had pulled out of the first dead creature, the one we had wedged in the corner without thinking about it for 2 days, and he picked it up. It was different now. The waxy shaft had gone soft. When he pressed his thumb into it, the surface gave like clay. He showed us. The spear had been sitting next to a janitor's bucket, and there had been salt on the floor, ice melt salt left over from some long ago winter that someone had spilled and never swept up. The shaft had been resting in the salt. The salt had eaten the shaft. Galbraith asked Holly how much salt would it take, in air, in suspension, to do that to the dome machine. She said she did not know. She said that depended on how the dome material was being held together. But she said that the dome material and the creatures in the spears were all the same family of molecule. Anyone could see that just by looking at them and touching them, and that if she had to guess, she would say that a sufficient quantity of salt aerosol, sprayed at the surface of the dome machine, would do to the machine what we had just watched happen to a 4-foot spear sitting in a quarter cup of spilled ice melt over 2 days. The problem was, of course, that we did not have a quantity of salt aerosol. We did not have a sprayer, and 6 miles of dead city stood between us and the thing we needed to spray. This is the part where I get to brag, a little, on behalf of people who are not here to brag for themselves. Margaret Galbraith, who had spent the entire dome event being underestimated by everyone including, sometimes me, looked up from the generator manual she had been reading and said, "There is a crop duster at the strip you came in on." I had not thought of it. I had landed almost on top of it. There was an old yellow Pawnee parked in the weeds at the far end of the apron at San Helio Municipal, a duster I had seen and dismissed because nobody dusted crops inside a city. Margaret had been doing the books for an agricultural co-op for 31 years. She knew that a Pawnee like that had a 500-gallon hopper. She knew that the hopper could be loaded, in a pinch, with any granulated or dissolved chemical compound that would pass through the nozzle gates. She knew because her own husband had been making her listen to him talk about applied chemistry over breakfast for 4 decades, that table salt dissolved in water and pressurized through agricultural nozzles produced a fine, persistent aerosol that would settle on any surface beneath it. And she knew, because she had been keeping the generator running and the lights on for 6 days, that there were 2 industrial bags of pool salt in the maintenance closet of the theater. Because the theater had a rooftop chiller that used salt for water treatment, 40 pounds each, 80 pounds total. Not enough to salt the ocean, but maybe enough, dissolved, to fill a 500-gallon hopper to a workable concentration. We took the rest of that night to plan it. I will not pretend we were calm. Reyes broke a chair. He did it slowly and, on purpose, against the wall, and then he stood there breathing with his fists open. Holly was the one who walked him outside and brought him back, 20 minutes later, both of them a little quieter, neither one of them looking at the rest of us. Galbraith ran the numbers 4 times, on the back of a popcorn bag, on whether the salt concentration would be enough at the rate the Pawnee could spray it. He worked it in pencil, then in pen, then again in pencil, and each time he came out within 1% or 2 of the same answer. He decided it would be, or near enough, and he said so, and that was when I understood that I was going to be flying that airplane. Lena cried in a small, private way for about a minute, and then she stopped, and she went and got the keys to the sedan, and she handed them to Reyes without speaking. Margaret kissed her husband once on the forehead in a way that no one was meant to see, and went back to the generator. I sat for a moment in the projection booth, with my hand on the spear, and thought about my father, who had been a crop duster, and who had told me once, on a hot afternoon in Bakersfield when I was 9 years old, the best thing about an airplane was that it would do exactly what you asked it to do, even when what you were asking it to do was insane. The plan was small and bad and the only plan we had. I would go back to the strip with Reyes. The 2 of us would get the Pawnee fueled, the hopper rinsed and refilled, the salt loaded and dissolved with water from the theater tank. While we did that, Galbraith and Lena and Holly would carry the rest of the dissolved salt, in fire extinguisher canisters Holly had rigged with hand pumps, to the perimeter of the dome machine at the harbor. They would distract whatever creatures were guarding the machine on the ground. I would come in from above, low and slow, and I would empty 500 gallons of saturated salt water onto the machine from 40 feet. Then I would pull up, climb out of the fog, and try to reach the army outside of the dome, on whatever frequency they were still listening on. Margaret would stay at the theater, with the radio and the diesel reserves, in case we all died and someone else had to know what we had tried. That is what we did. Reyes and I got to the strip just before sunset on day 7. We did not see a single creature on the way. Galbraith had been right about something he had only half said. The things were nocturnal in the cool, and during the strangest hours of late afternoon, when the dome held its last warmth, they retreated. Reyes drove. I sat with the axe in my lap. The Pawnee was where I remembered it, and her tanks were a little better than half. We rolled her out of the weeds. We hand-pumped salt and water into the hopper for 2 hours, in silence, working until our shoulders were burning. When we were done, the hopper sloshed and the airplane smelled like a swimming pool. I asked Reyes if he had ever fired a rifle from inside a moving cockpit. He said he had not. I told him he would not need to. I told him to sit in the back seat with the 11 rounds in the spear and to watch for anything coming up the ladder while I taxied. He laughed for the first time in a week. He told me he had thought I was a coward when he first met me. He told me he had been wrong. I told him to shut up and strap in. It was the worst takeoff of my life. The fog was a ceiling at about 300 feet. I had to fly under it the whole way. I knew the boulevards of San Helio from the air the way a man knows the layout of his own block, and I steered by them because every instrument I had was lying to me in some new way every minute. The artificial horizon had given up an hour after I had landed 7 days ago, and it had not come back. The altimeter was off by I did not know how much. The compass spun in slow, lazy half-turns whenever I crossed an intersection, as if there were a magnet down there in the asphalt that nobody had told me about. I do not know what that fog was doing to the airframe. I know my feelings ached. Reyes, behind me, told me when I was drifting. He had no instruments either, but he had eyes, and he had grown up on a fishing boat, and he could keep a line on a landmark in a way pilots forget how to do. He called out the steeples, the bank of the West Tower, the empty curve of the freeway interchange, the hospital with the H on the roof where there should have been people and there were no people. I told him to keep watching the wings. The Pawnee was carrying nearly half a ton of salt water, and she handled like a freight elevator. Every gust of cold air off the fog made her drop a foot or two like a brick, and I would haul her back up against the yoke and feel the salt slosh forward in the hopper. And I would tell myself very calmly that this was a job, and the job was no different from any other job I had taken money for, and I had taken money for a lot of jobs. We came up on the harbor 12 minutes after takeoff. The dome machine was where I had drawn it from the roof. It was bigger up close. It was the size, I now know, of a 4-story building, a hunched, lobed thing pulsing like a lung, with the fog rolling off the upper surface of it in slow, organized streams, the way smoke rolls off a coal fire if you know what to look for. There were creatures around it, 20, 30 at least, hunched on the ground in the cooler shadow. And there, at the foot of it, were 3 small, bright orange dots that I almost flew past because I could not believe I was seeing them. It was Galbraith. It was Lena. It was Holly. They were standing in the open with their hands on the pumps of 3 fire extinguishers, spraying salt water sideways into the front of the dome machine, drawing the creatures off the machine and toward themselves. They had taken the orange canisters out of the theater. They had walked on foot 6 miles through a fogged city, dragging steel cylinders, so that the creatures would look at them and not at me. I cannot tell you what I felt at 40 feet over the harbor, with my hand on the dump lever of a crop duster, watching a 63-year-old man and his daughter, and a pharmacist standing in a circle of 7-foot wet-skinned things and spraying them in the face with brine. I pulled the lever. 500 gallons of saturated salt water fell out of the Pawnee in just under 11 seconds. It did not fall as a column. It came down as a sheet, atomized by the wind under the wings, a heavy gray-white rain that hit the top of the dome machine and ran down its sides in dark wet ropes. The machine made a sound I never want to hear again in my life. It was the sound of a thing the size of a building drawing in a breath, and then deciding it could not let the breath back out. The fog stopped pouring off the top. The whole shape of it shuddered. Then the upper lobes began to collapse inward, and the outer surface where the salt had touched it began to come apart in long wet ribbons. The creatures around it went down, not all at once. The ones in the spray went first, and they went the way Holly had said they would, fast and from the inside. The ones farther out got slower, then stopped, then folded down onto the pavement and did not get up. I do not know how many we killed in that 11 seconds. I do not need to know. I pulled the Pawnee up. The ceiling above me, which had been solid for 7 days, was starting to thin. I could see for the first time since I had flown in through the top of it, a hole, ragged opening westward toward the sea. I climbed. I climbed for 2 minutes, and I came out the top of the dome into clean blue late afternoon sky, and the radio in my headset, which had been dead since I crossed the boundary, opened up in a wash of voices. I told them who I was. I told them where I had come from. I told them the dome was breaking. I told them there were 3 civilians on the ground at the harbor under the machine, and the army needed to be there in the next 10 minutes, or there would not be 3 civilians on the ground at the harbor anymore. The army was there in 8. Galbraith lived. Lena lived. Holly. Reyes lived, though he never flew again, and he never asked to. Margaret lived in the theater, and she came out on a Humvee about an hour after the dome came down with a thermos of coffee that the army had given her, and a perfectly composed expression that I think was the most extraordinary feat of human will I have ever witnessed. 81,000 people in San Helio did not live. That number is in the official record, though the official record does not say what killed them. The official record says atmospheric anomaly. I have flown through a lot of atmospheric anomalies in my life. None of them had teeth. The men in the suits came to see me later in the hospital. They asked me what I had seen. I told them. They asked me to sign something that said I had not seen any of it. I told them where they could put the pen. One of them smiled at me in a way that was not a smile, and said that there were national security considerations, and that the public was not ready. I told him the public had been not ready for 6 days in a theater on Orson Avenue, and the public had figured it out fine. He left. He came back, we argued. In the end, I signed a version of the document that said I would not discuss the events outside of officially designated channels, and I have since then considered every recorder I have ever spoken into to be an officially designated channel, because I designated it. So here is what I want on the record. We did not beat them with our weapons. Our weapons did nothing. Our rifles did nothing. Our tanks did nothing. Our airplanes did nothing until I put a hopper of pool salt in one of them. The thing we beat them with was the thing we always beat them with, which is that there were 6 people in a theater on Orson Avenue who would not stop noticing. A janitor's spilled salt eating a spear in a corner, a pH strip on a dead man's lip, a crop duster forgotten in the weeds at the end of a runway. A wife who had read her husband's chemistry papers across the breakfast table for 40 years and remembered, on the 7th day, that a 500-gallon hopper could be a weapon. They had a dome. We had a pharmacist. They had a fog that could not be cut. We had a man with a pH paper, that skin that closed every wound. We had a hollow piece of their own bone, and a doctor who picked it up and would not put it down for 6 days. They came up out of the inside of the earth, because we had been hammering on the lid, and that is a fault I will carry until I am dead. But they made a mistake when they came up, and the mistake was that they thought we were the same as the things they had eaten down in the dark, and we are not. We are the species that walks into a fog city with a duffel bag of cold medicine and a spear, and we figure it out and we come home. I am going to stop the recorder now. I can hear myself wheezing, and I have promised the doctor I will not push the lungs in the evenings. If you are listening to this and you are young, and you are afraid that one day something is going to come out of the ground, or down out of the sky, or up out of the sea, here is the only thing I have to tell you that is worth telling. Pay attention to the small wrong thing. That is all of it. That is the whole secret. The slime on the asphalt that should not have been cold, the spear that should not have been hollow, the dead man whose mouth tasted of the wrong kind of water, the pool salt in the back of the maintenance closet, the yellow airplane in the weeds. The small wrong thing is where the door is. We walked through it. So can you.